all of a sudden, I'd go to sleep at night, and the entire night would be nothing but blue light.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity. This is Synchronicity.
Welcome to episode 50 of Synchronicity. My guest today is Robert Waggoner. You may remember Robert from just a few episodes ago, where was it a couple episodes ago? A couple? No, a few episodes ago, where Robert discussed some of the practical implications of lucid dreaming and what lucid dreamings were. A nice little overview. Today is a much more in-depth conversation about some other things you can do related to spiritual practices. We're going to go with that term with lucid dreams, and also some of his personal experiences, which is what I find most interesting. I love to hear people's experiences with dreams, so lucid dreams even better. But first, we're going to get to some other stuff. Guess what, guys? And girls, ladies, women, men, fellows, I was a guest on a podcast. This is not a regular occurrence, but I'm trying to go on some more. If you haven't been able to, if you've been a regular listener of this podcast, I got a lovely comment on YouTube today of someone who listened to, I put these podcasts on YouTube too, because some people use YouTube, and once in a while I'll get a comment from a listener. And usually very positive, but this person really, really did not like me at all. He said, really happy to see Lorenzo from the Psychedelic Salon on, and I'm paraphrasing here, on a podcast. It's nice to hear him on other podcasts, but geez, this guy interviewing, shut up already. Enough with the talking. Thanks, guy. Appreciate it. I'm glad you took the time out of your day to tell me that you enjoyed that he's on a podcast, but that I suck. My point is that in case you haven't been able to tell by now, I enjoy talking. So I did that on Corey Allen's wonderful Astral Hustle podcast. Go check that out. It's on MindPod Network. He has his own website, Corey Allen, corey-allen.com. Find it on iTunes, all places you would want to find podcasts. I had a really good time talking with him about lots of cool stuff. And yeah, I really had a good time on it. He's a great interviewer. Not an interviewer, it's just a conversation. That's really what it is. That's why it's so good. So if you want to check that out, cool, I'm there. Okay, I'm getting right to the episode with Robert this week because I'm super excited for you guys to hear it. First off, I want to say there's a great book that just came out by David Nichtern called Awakening from the Daydream, and it ties in nicely with what I'm going to talk about and relate Robert's lucid dreaming experiences with, which is the 6 Samsaric realms in Buddhist cosmology. And these realms relate to, I've talked about them before in the podcast, but they relate to 6, either, depending on how you want to look at it, actual realms and also states of mind that we can go throughout our life and days. So these realms are the God realm, the jealous God realm. You know what? I have an idea. Quick, mid, chain, poof, gonna do it here. I have a really awesome Alan Watts talk that I'm going to play for you that explains the 6 Samsaric realms. And then I'm going to jump back in and talk a little bit more about Robert, and we can go from there in this particular episode. I think this is going to be cool. Also, I will remind you, syncpodcast.com/Watts. Go there. You'll get taken to this Alan Watts Foundation shop. Use the code SYNC, SYNC, all caps, at checkout. You get 30% off your first order. So if you like what you're about to hear, do that and you get 30% off. Also, if you want to become an affiliate and get sponsored, let's say you have a podcast, let's say you have an email list, let's say you've got social media, hit me up, noah@syncpodcast.com. Going to get that rolling for people who are interested. Okay, I'm going to cut me out and put in Alan Watts, and I'll be back in a second.
This seminar about birth, death, and the unborn is going to be a discussion of the Buddhist philosophy of change. And I'm going to start out by going into the very tricky and difficult question of the Buddhist view of birth and death and the doctrine which is ordinarily understood as reincarnation or rebirth. It's a curious thing that many Westerners who become interested in Hinduism or Buddhism do so because of this idea of reincarnation. They like it. It gives a more satisfactory vision of individual history and development than the two possibilities that would normally be open to Westerners to believe in. On the one hand, you've got the choice of the Christian view, which is that you live in this world once, and in this 80 years and 10, your eternal fate is settled. Or you've got the possibility of the materialistic view, which is that you only live once, and when you're dead, you're dead. That's that. You're a flash of consciousness between two eternal darknesses. Intelligent people in the Western world have never felt very happy about either of these two prospects. And therefore there's a certain attractiveness about the idea, which seems to be the point of Buddhism and Hinduism, that you are a soul on a pilgrimage, and that from some extremely obscure origin you began as some sort of animalcule, and worked your way up step by step through all sorts of forms of life, and finally you have the privilege of appearing in human form. And once you've got there, you have an opportunity to develop to the highest spiritual position. You must remember that according to both Hindu and Buddhist doctrines, the human form is a very privileged position. For there are, according to both of them, because they share a common cosmology, 6 domains of beings. And if you visualize the wheel of life with its 6 divisions, at the highest, top division, there is the realm of the Deva. Deva is a word from which we get the word divine, and equally the word devil. A Deva means, though, originally a god, or more correctly, an angel. Angel is a better Western translation of Deva than God. Immediately opposite the Deva world, at the bottom of the circle, there is the Naraka world of beings in torment, of the absolute, this is the dimension of the world which is the screaming mimes, which is experience in the form of horror. The Deva world is the experience of being in the form of bliss. And between these two poles, there are all kinds of ranges. There are, for example, the Asuras next to the Devas, going clockwise around the wheel. And the Asuras are they are wrathful beings. Ashura is the incarnation of divine anger. Then next to the Ashura going around are the animals, all animals whatsoever. Then again we get to the Naraka at the bottom, the place of the purgatory, we'll call it. Then coming up again, there's the world of the Preta, who are frustrated beings. And they're represented iconographically as having very large bellies and very tiny mouths. That is to say, an immense appetite with very little means of satisfying it. They're a sort of spiritual bottleneck. And then coming up, between the Pretas and the Devas, is the world of the humans. And this is understood to represent a sort of middle position. You can be liberated from the human state because the Devas are too happy to be liberated, the Asuras too furious, the animals too dumb, the Narakas too tormented, and the Pretas too frustrated. you need not take this as a literal account of various kinds of being in the universe. You can take them simply as a depiction of various states of the human mind, of the moods you can go through. They're all really in your own head, as we shall see later on about many other things. But these are the 6 worlds of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, and the notion is that one reincarnates again and again through the 6 worlds. This is the popular idea.
There you go. Alan Watts just did a great job of describing these realms that exist. So what's interesting about this and how it relates to this episode, so you heard at the beginning, the little tease is Robert's talking about this blue light, that was his entire dream. And immediately when he was saying this in the episode, I was like, you know what, this reminds me of something I read in 2 books. One is the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, and the second is this book I've been reading by Ponlop Rinpoche, which is Mind Beyond Death, and I just finished, and it's amazing. I highly, highly recommend it. So it reminded me of 2 things that I was reading about that, which is when you are in the bardo state after death, and you're in the bardo of becoming, it's called, you get attracted to a series of lights, and they each correspond to one of those realms that Alan Watts was just talking about there. And the one that corresponds to the human realm is a blue light. I believe it's described as like a pale blue light, which is interesting because that's the color of Earth, really. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting when Robert was talking about it, and he goes on to describe several other experiences he's had, and then he actually talks about Tibetan Buddhists who he's met, who, like Lama, who was saying, like, this is really advanced stuff, this is dream yoga, very interesting stuff. I love it, especially now that, like, the 2 Venn diagrams, one circle is Tibetan Buddhism and the other is dreams, that they are able to overlap in such an awesome way. That's pretty cool. That's really cool. So I don't want to give anything else away. I know this has been a long intro. We had a little interlude from Alan Watts. It's cool. The Alan Watts Foundation. Happy to unveil some more talks for free. Also, little teaser here, little recommendation. If you're part of the MindPod network, mailing list, email list, I was giving away a free talk. So what you just heard there, you can hear the full thing. It's about 43 minutes. Sign up for that email list and let me know when you sign up, and I'll get that out to you. Actually, you don't have to let me know. Just sign up for the email list and you'll get that. That's my promise to you. So without further ado, here is again Robert Waggoner. Cool. Thanks for coming on again.
I'm happy to. You know, this area that I hope we're going to talk about, communicating with an inner awareness, is really an important area, and a lot of people don't get it, and a lot of lucid dreamers have yet to experience it. So
let me tell you what's happened since the last episode, which came out 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I send out an email every week to what I call the Synchronicity community, which is, you know, people sign up for my email list and talk about the podcast, and I write a little blurb, sometimes longer, sometimes not. And this one wasn't particularly long. It's like, hey, we talked about some stuff, blah, blah, blah. And people typically write back, depending on the subject matter. And I got, a very large response, considering that this wasn't like a long, sometimes I ask a question or something, but it was just pretty much a regular email that I was going. Admittedly, it was a little rushed, but the response was phenomenal. So I had 2 people write in and tell me their lucid dreams, one for the first time ever, had Great. Never did it, saw his hands pop in front of his face, and I'll tell you an interesting thing that happened in that story. But another person wrote in and said specifically that lucid dreaming was a huge part of their spiritual practice, that it's something that they had started doing since they were 17, that meditating in lucid dreams was particularly interesting. They wrote a whole, and I think it was Jeremy, was his name, who wrote to me, and I wrote back like that was really cool. Like I couldn't equal what he had just written me. I was like, that's really awesome, but I'm trying to give it justice now because he wrote in. And then also my aunt, who lives in California, was visiting, and she came to stay with us on Saturday and Sunday, stayed overnight. And I don't think she knew anything about the podcast. I don't think she knew anything about lucid dreaming. But she said she then that night before had her first lucid dream my son, my 5-month-old son was in the dream. And she said what woke her up to the fact that it was a lucid dream was that he was like naked, but he was off the bed. And she's like, this is too weird. This doesn't make sense. And then she was like lucid and she remembers like looking at some art, some guy behind a bar, and she wanted to get his card. Like, so I haven't I've been intending to lucid dream almost every night before I go to sleep. I'm concerned that everyone else is getting the benefit of this. So that's like, exactly. How do I lucid dream? No, I'm kidding. But I just thought that was really interesting that so many things, just by virtue of talking about it, started sprouting up in a lot of different ways. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. No, that's great. And I'm happy for the person who had their first lucid dream and the spiritual guy, Jeremy or whatever, meditating in a lucid dream. You can do profound things, but when I talk about it, I sound like I'm crazy or starting to lose my mind.
I know how it goes, but whatever.
But when people experience it and keep doing it, they're just like, oh my God, this totally blows my mind. But anyway, that's great. This whole area, it's so ripe, and I don't understand what's going to catch it on fire. I think it's going to have to be like how the Beatles went to India and started to meditate.
And now everyone does TM.
Now everyone, 30 years later, everyone meditates. It's going to have to be something like that. Some actor or actress who, in a lucid dream, heals themselves of some ailment or does something incredible. And then everyone will be talking, well, what's lucid dreaming? What's lucid dreaming?
What's interesting about that, I actually heard this guy Flying Lotus, he's like a musician, producer, makes music. He said that he made contact with Tom York, the lead singer of Radiohead, in an astral projection / lucid dream. And that's how like they met. And then like Tom York brought him on tour or something. It was such like a weird off sort. Like no one paid any attention to it. It was like right under the radar and like totally dismissed. But I know what you're saying. Like I do feel like this is something. Well, regardless, we're talking about it, so we're doing our little part.
Exactly. But anyway, there's some. Bringing up that reminds me of another story. A guy from New York City becomes lucidly aware when he sees this deceased drummer that he knew from another rock and roll band. The deceased drummer comes over and tells the guy that his future is in drumming, and he's going to teach him the secrets of drumming in the lucid dream. And so the guy wakes up and he's just his mind's blown away because this was a famous drummer who either had an overdose or something, whatever, died. The next day, the guy thinks, okay, I'm going to go down into Manhattan to this music shop and look at the drum sets there and all. He walks into the music shop. He's looking at the drum sets and then walks in the former partner of the deceased guy, the head of the musical group. And he starts talking to this guy about how they're looking for a drummer and would he be interested in joining their band as their drummer. And the guy goes, this one lucid dream has totally effing changed my entire life. Now I'm part of a band that's really happening and yada, yada, yada. He says like, whoa. Anyway, it's like, wow. But that's great, this Flying Lotus story. I'll have to check that out. If you have the links to it,
I'll send it to you.
I'd love it. Good.
So let's talk about what is going on. How do lucid dreams interact with spiritual practices, quote unquote?
Right. So lucid dreaming, again, is a tool. It's a tool of aware relating. When you're consciously aware in the unconscious or subconscious dreaming, you can do anything. Yeah. You can fly around to have fun. You can have lucid dream sex. You can try to emotional heal or physically heal your body or whatever. But you can also do spiritual practices. So, for example, some people meditate. Some people in a lucid dream, they stop what they're doing and they sit there and begin to meditate. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it'll lead to profound, utterly profound experiences.
Like what happens when you meditate in a lucid dream. Do you meditate in waking life?
Right. Yeah, so I have a meditation practice, and this is an important point. There's different types of meditation practices.
Yes.
For example, some people might just chant one mantra over and over.
Yeah.
Other people might empty their mind. Other people might follow their breath or observe thoughts and then let them disappear. So anyway, for me, meditating involves emptying the mind. So this happened to me probably 20 years ago. I was having a lucid dream. I remembered a friend had asked me if I'd ever meditated in a lucid dream, and I hadn't up to that point. So this is probably around 95 or something. I stopped in the path. I sat there in a lotus position, and I was looking straight ahead and began to meditate by emptying my mind. And then it was the most incredible thing. All of a sudden, it was like the imagery, the dream screen, the dream projection just started to be ripped away, and brilliant white light came shining through the rips, just like a movie theater that someone was just ripping away parts of the screen, just ripping it away. And so then I thought, that made me come out of the meditation because it was so profound and this light is shooting into my eyes. Then I thought, well, maybe I should close my eyes and see what happens. So then I closed my eyes in the lucid dream, began to meditate by emptying my mind. And I'll tell you, within 30 seconds to 1 minute, I was having the most profound, transcendent, meditative experience that I've ever had.
Yeah.
Now, the important thing about this, I talked about this one time in a webinar that I was doing with Michael Katz, who's a dream yoga teacher in New York City, and some other people. And this Michael Katz, he said in the Dzogchen tradition, my experience is exactly what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I literally am reading about this in a book called Mind Beyond Death. Continue, not to cut you off.
Yeah. So think of that. When you empty the mind, you realize that the mind is the projector of experience. But when you empty it, what happens? All of a sudden, that kind of base awareness, this light, begins to shine through because the contents of your mind and your self-ideation are disappearing.
Yeah.
And so Michael Katz, he told me he thought it was amazing that in my first try at meditating in a lucid dream, I'd accomplish this. So that's just one example of some incredible experiences that people have.
I mean, like I was saying, that is something I am reading about. They're talking about Bardo states. Dreaming is one of them. I mean, I'm reading it's Tibetan. It's Dzogchen, Vajrayana. And what you're describing as emptying the mind is actually referred to in Tibetan Buddhism as shamatha meditation. It's different than something, say, like Vipassana, which is insight meditation, or metta, loving kindness meditation. They're different forms, but emptying the mind is like basically the first thing, as I understand it, that you're taught in these schools, because it's like the base level thing. So what's fascinating to me about this is I'm reading about all of this stuff. Maybe I'm probably doing it at some point. I just don't remember any of it. Who knows? But what you're describing is referred to as the ground luminosity. And this is this shining light that after you die, essentially, you have supposedly many opportunities to realize that this ground luminosity is exactly what you're talking about. This is the base consciousness. This is actually the emptiness merging with the ever manifesting projections of the mind, what you're talking about. And if you can recognize it, then you have the ability to determine where you would potentially be reborn, if in a different realm, for the benefit of all sentient beings. So the reason, this is my hypothesis, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. In a dream, especially if you're in a lucid dream in your experience, you don't have a physical body, right? And this is something that can be a hugely limiting factor for someone trying to realize the true nature of mind. Like, if this is all emptiness and projections of mind, but we're touching this table and I'm speaking into this microphone, it's not as convincing as if you're in a dream and are able to do it. And I mean, it's mind-blowing that you had the experience in a dream like that, but on some ways I'm not surprised, because it would kind of lend itself to that. So yeah.
Well, it definitely lends itself to it. I think what happens, and this is why I try to get across this that lucid dreaming is not about control, because the sailor does not control the sea, neither does the lucid dreamer control the dream.
Right.
So when I began to empty my mind in this meditative experience, the projected mental overlay, the projected mental energy all responds. When you empty your mind, when you let go of all that projected mental energy, then it's exactly like you say, this ground luminosity, some people might call it Rigpa, who knows what. Right. But it appears as this extraordinarily brilliant light. And so the beautiful thing about this is that in lucid dreams, you can practice this. And I have a good friend, Claire Johnson, who had a story in my second book, Lucid Dreaming, Plain and Simple. And she said that she's been practicing meditation so much in her lucid dreams that now in her waking life, when she meditates, what used to take her 20, 25 minutes in the waking state to get to a certain depth, because she's practiced it and had such profound experiences in her lucid dreams so frequently, now in 4 or 5 minutes, she says she gets to this incredible state. What used to take her like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it too, is that in lucid dreaming, it may help to kind of open the gateway, open the pathway more clearly, more quickly, more totally, and so that then when you do it in the waking state, it's more possible and much more easy.
I mean, it makes sense that you can hone a craft in a lucid state. I mean, I remember also in that book, you were talking about the swimmer who was able to look at himself from multiple different perspectives and thus hone his craft. He was like a terrible swimmer, and the coach was like, "You suck." He's like, "You shouldn't." And then he was like, he lucid dreamed and like really focused in on the intricate moments of like what it felt like when his hands hit the water. And I think, again, I love the Tibetan stuff because they talk about like picture in detail this particular emanation of a Buddha. Like look at this specifically and detailed. And then in a lucid dream, when it's purely mental or whatever you want to call it, it's not physical corporal reality, you have the ability to look and study at these things. I mean, that's why I think there's 6 Bardo states, and one of them is dreaming, like they, what we refer to as dreaming. That's a big part of it, because there is a real opportunity to use consciousness. And I read something last night, and I had never heard this before, so I use the term consciousness pretty freely and pretty openly to refer to God knows how many things. And I was reading last night in this book. I am giving it away this week as a book giveaway. I'll probably do it again. It's such good. It's Mind Beyond Death by this guy Ponlop Rinpoche. So great. But he was talking about the difference between what we refer to as consciousness is our momentary perception of this continuous stream of events. And what he refers to as wisdom, and this is in Tibetan Buddhism, is different than consciousness. This is actually the base level reality. They call it like the alpha wave Dharmakaya. It's like this, there's a whole name for it. But essentially, there's a distinction between clearly seeing wisdom and then what we experience as consciousness. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I was wondering what your thoughts are. Are there changes in consciousness? And if so, what are they from waking life to, because here's what I'm driving at. Especially since the last podcast we did get together, I think the more you talk about, the more you investigate these other places, dreams being a huge one of them, they start to proliferate in a lot of different ways. People write to me about this stuff. Relatives are having dreams. My wife has been having really vivid dreams. I think there is a link. I think I really, really like the idea of dreaming as we do it commonly, just being a similar thing to what we do in waking life, and that the same types of things, while not in the, I can't take off and fly here, the same type of quote unquote magical things that can happen can also take place in this reality. So what, have you had experiences of that validate that, or yeah?
Well, so it's interesting. If you can imagine this, in lucid dreams, and I write about this in my first book, I began to meet this recurring dream figure who was this Asian guy with very strange, kind of radical looking hair. And And in my lucid dreams, he was kind of teaching me and encouraging me, especially around 1995. So by that time, I'd been a lucid dreamer for 20 years. And what I realized is that the lucid dream reality and the dream reality were propped up by my beliefs and expectations, my focus, my intent, and also this larger awareness that I found that you could communicate with in lucid dreams. But altogether, all these forces went together and helped to create the lucid dream experience. They helped to create the dream experience. And to me, it seemed like they helped to create this waking reality experience. Yeah. And so then I wondered, well, how do you go beyond lucid dreaming? And I realized, to go beyond lucid dreaming, you have to let go of your beliefs, let go of your expectations, let go of your self-history, let go of basically the attachment to the self-view, the self-ideation. And then this is what began to happen. When I began to think about this really deeply in 95, all of a sudden, I'd go to sleep at night, and the entire night would be nothing but blue light. And I remember the first time this happened, I woke up and I looked at my dream journal and I thought, what do I put in my dream journal? Blue light? Nothing happened. I mean, there was no me, no action, no plot, no anything, just blue light the entire night. And I want to tell you, that I had never studied Buddhism because of all the kind of translation issues involved, and it just wasn't my thing. And so this kept recurring, this blue light the entire night. One morning I go down to the breakfast table, and my wife Wendy is there, and this is Waking Reality. She looked really concerned. She goes, Robert, what's happening to you? And I go, what do you mean? And she said, well, last night I woke up and I look at your face, and she said, I've never seen a person in such utter bliss before. and I said, well, I'm trying to understand the true nature of reality, and I'm having some really wild experiences. And so then what happened is that, a few weeks later, after a few more blue light nights, one night I become lucidly aware in a lucid dream. I'm kind of in this bubble, and there's these two beings who are taking me through this totally interesting space. It's like a space that has different properties than this three-dimensional Earth reality space we have. Anyway, they get me to this spot. It's I'll just call it kind of like a white temple. I'm now there, able to walk around. I'm lucidly aware. I come around the corner, and here's this being composed of blue light. So imagine you're looking at a being. You can look right through it because it's composed of blue light. It has a little white sash in its left arm. It has a trident, a three-pronged whatever. And I start to laugh. Is it a blue light god? Is it a blue light monster? What is this all about? I just started to laugh. And then I think, well, what do I do here? And so like Castaneda, whenever he was at some gate or whatever, and he had whatever, he always tried to get beyond it. So I just thought, okay, I'll try to get beyond this thing. I go running right towards it, so I'm going to try to get beyond it. And right as I get up parallel to it, there's this incredible kind of inner explosion. And when I woke up from that lucid dream, I felt like each cell of my body had somehow been changed by this experience. It was just this intuitive knowing that on a cellular level, I was changed by this. But then, so a little bit after this, I'm ending up this story, I'm going to sleep one night, and my larger awareness tells me that if I truly want to go the full distance, I might cease to be. And I told it, I go, look, I'm 40 whatever at that time, or whatever, however old I was. I go, look, I've come this far. I don't care if I cease to be. I want to go the full distance, because all of this otherwise will just be some tragic comedy dream reality that I'm involved in. And I remember that moment, Noah, I turned over in bed and looked at my wife, and I realized that she was a mental construct, just like this Robert Waggoner ego is a mental construct. And that was a really powerful moment. But I told my larger awareness I want to go. So that night, and this is really hard to explain, and I bring it up in my first book, but that night, if you can imagine awareness, aware within awareness. And what's interesting here, feeling does not exist, but what does exist is knowing. And each little awareness has potentially the knowing of all the awareness.
Got it. Yeah.
So if you're aware within this word. So this experience happens, then boom, it stops. I'm standing there in this kind of dark area that's relatively typical in some lucid dreams, and there's a guy in a robe there, and I ask him, was that a lucid dream? And he goes, oh no, to enter a lucid dream, go here. And I step into the space that he points to, and now I'm hurtling through this tunnel of light, and there's geometric symbols every now and then, and I'm hurtling through this tunnel of light, and then I know I need to go up. If I'm going to enter a lucid dream, I go up, and I enter a lucid dream. I actually come up through the floor of this lucid dream. And then after the lucid dream, I wake up. So when I woke up, I thought, okay, there was a lucid dream, there was a tunnel, there was a guy who was standing there who answered my question, but what was that awareness within awareness at the very beginning? And it was 3 years later, I was at an Association for the Study of Dreams conference in Hawaii, and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who wrote the Tibetan Yogas of Sleep and Dreams, he was there because his book had just come out, and he began to talk about the Buddhist view of dream yoga, and the ultimate practice was an experience of awareness by awareness itself, a non-dual experience.
That's right.
And I about fell over. I thought, whoa, this is the first time I've heard anyone even come close to talking about this experience. So anyway, that's how deep a person can take it. But in that example that we talked about first of meditating and emptying the mind, that gives you kind of a taste of what happens if you agree to voluntarily cease.
Right.
So it's trippy.
It's really trippy, but I wonder what you touched on something there that I think is really interesting. When you're talking about looking over at your wife and realizing that she is a mental construct and it's a conception of what's going on in much the same way that you are and I am.
Right.
And this is something that I think there's a lot of ways to come to this realization. A lot of people in the 60s and then on, psychedelics was a really easy and quick way to do it. Maybe you wouldn't be able to retain all of the wisdom and knowledge because it would be so different. But this is something that I also kind of intuitively feel and know. I think there's a big distinction there, like you pointed out, that regardless of how solid or real this reality seems, it is very illusory. There are things, and I think that's why I call this podcast Synchronicity, and this is something that Jung tapped into. He's like, listen, shit is maybe not the way we think it is. Like, these are not just random things that are happening, and we can kind of prove that to some extent. And sure, maybe it's anecdotal, and maybe it doesn't follow the rules of empirical science and the laws of averages, but we have enough proof and inner knowing here and experiences to say this is something going on. Then let's say you're not satisfied with that. If you want to go read anything from thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, up to the current day, people are talking about this all of the time. This isn't like and it's coming from different parts of the world. There's no this isn't like a con being pulled on people. So and I agree, I think we are these projections and constructs, and we like to experience reality as a sense of self. And that's, I think, why a lot of people have a big fear of dying. And I know that's certainly one of my fears around death is like, do I continue? Am I going to be me? Am I going to know that I'm Noah? And, the more I read about it, the less, I don't want to say fearful I get of it, but the less convinced, I become more convinced that there's something that happens. I'm not that I need it to happen, but I like the thought of something continuing because there's some logic to it seemingly. But also it can kind of strip away the idea that you have to be something. You have to be Noah. You have to be Robert. And there can be this awareness that's aware of itself that carries on. And I think, I mean, this then gets into very important questions like, well, what do we think the meaning of life is? Well, then why are we choosing? Let's say this is, and I am of the belief personally that we incarnate knowingly. I don't think this is like some random thing where someone like forces it upon us and like, oh shit, now you're Noah, good, deal with that. I think this is some larger part of I don't want to say consciousness, but this knowingness, this experience that wants to experience an aspect of itself, and kind of we are the emanations of that happening. So like what do you think having, I mean, you have now transcended just from the lucid dreaming stuff, having experiences like that, and I think the blue light stuff is very interesting. If I'm not mistaken, in Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, he talks about when you're about to reincarnate, this blue light is actually, I think it's the human world. It's the world where you become a human. You're drawn to a series of lights that correspond to the 6 samsaric realms. And I believe blue is human. So you were definitely potentially touching on that. But my point is like, what do you think is going on now? Why are we here? What is going on?
Right. So a person really has to look at this in a broad framework. And again, you can use lucid dreaming if you want to as a tool to do this. But what happens, and especially what's happened to me, and normally I don't talk about this. I'm going to write a 3rd book sometime about dream yoga and lucid dreaming.
Awesome.
But after 95, after this experience, I began to have lucid dreams in which I sought out past life aspects of myself. And this is something that a person can do in a lucid dream. Now, the thing of it is, this is actually a little bit of a dangerous practice. And so if you're mentally unstable and listening to this podcast, do not do this, because, and I want to tell you why. So for about 9 months, every time I became lucidly aware, I sought out a past life aspect of myself and had a lot of success with it. But then what would happen was, in Buddhism, they talk about seeds of alaya, or these kind of seeds of past life. We can call it karma. It's not really punishment. It's more education, but or desires or attachments and aversions and that kind of thing. But anyway, what would happen is, as I began to do this practice, during my waking day, I could literally, at a subliminal level, hear one of these past life aspects. And so here's an example of how, why I say that if you're not mentally stable, this could really be troubling. So imagine this. Here I am. It's the middle of the afternoon. I go to my local store, Fairway. I'm there in the store like I've been 1,000 times before. I'm pushing my cart, and as I'm pushing it along, at a different level of awareness, I can hear a little bit of a commentary by a past life aspect. Then, when I turn the aisle, and suddenly here's the 60 feet of meat market under glass, I hear this other aspect of myself go, oh my goodness, they keep cut up dead carcasses. They have a cemetery here where they store their food. And I'll tell you, that is not a Robert Waggoner thought. that did not come from my stream of consciousness.
Yeah, I get it.
And so that's what I'm saying, that, if you start to wake up these kind of seeds of awareness, then sometimes you'll realize that they have their own view, their own commentary on experience.
I think that's fascinating.
But in the bigger picture, it seems like to me what we're doing here is that beings want to be. I mean, energetic beingness just simply wants to be in form. So form is emptiness, but emptiness is also form.
That's right.
It wants to bubble up and be expressed, and then it wants to take that knowing, that learning, and use it for further growth and development. And so I think what's happening here is that we're in an educational system.
Yeah.
we're learning. We're learning about creativity. We're learning about growth. We're learning about fulfillment. We're learning spiritual lessons. And at a certain point, when we've learned enough, then we go on to other dimensions that are beyond the physical.
Yes.
And so it might take a lot of lives. It might, who knows. I want to tell you that I had a brother, David. In my family, there were 5 of us boys and my little sister. But my brother David, I was the youngest boy, so he was number 2 in the family.
Okay.
He developed multiple sclerosis, and he died.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Around when he was 57, 58. The night before he died, I became lucidly aware when I saw a friend of mine who lives in San Francisco who's a Vedic astrologer, and I saw another guy who's a scholar of dreams, and I became lucidly aware. And they took me into a room, and you know that backward swastika that you see in Buddhism?
Yeah.
So imagine that you walk into a room, and there's tables set up in that backward swastika, and sitting at them were all the incarnations of my brother David. And you walk into this room, and there's like 200 people from various times and eons. Wow. Most of them were basically peasants, pretty poor-looking people. Some of them had tattoos, all different cultures, all different races. And I walked amongst them. And then I looked to my friend, who's a Vedic astrologer and also a Buddhist. And I asked him, "Where do we sit here?" And he goes, "Well, I guess the only place available here at the very center of the crossed lines, which is basically kind of the hub of emptiness, if you can imagine that." But when I woke up, I was just stunned, and also I woke up and got a phone call an hour later that my brother David had passed away. Wow. But so what I'm saying is that this issue of reincarnation, it's in my first book that I wrote, I had a chapter on lucid dreaming and past lives, but my editor took it out. She said there had been some Pew survey that showed only 1 in 4 Americans believed in past lives. And so she was taking it out because the book was also getting too long. But I want to tell you, if you have the experience, you begin to see it, and it becomes so much more real and so much more acceptable. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with so much what you've just said, and I think, I mean, it's huge. Also, I'll point out that I think there is typically a function, because a lot of people may be asking, well, if you're even the Pew research, right? Well, I don't believe in past lives. I don't believe in reincarnation. That's just phooey. That's just your imagination believing in that. I think there's people who say that, but I think there is a functional element of us not being able to remember past lives. Let me tell, just as a thought experiment for people listening and myself, let's say you died traumatically in one of your past lives. Do you want to experience that right now? Do you want to remember what it felt like to die? Maybe you had a whole family. Maybe you had tons of families. Maybe you were an alligator and you had a family and you got killed. Who knows? My point is there is some aspect, and I think in Buddhism they talk about once you enter your future mother's womb, you begin to forget. This process of dissolving that happens at death then starts anew as re-emerging, and you forget these things. And I think what you also mentioned about hearing aspects of yourself is something. I had a transcendental experience that lasted about 3-4 months after I took LSD when I was about 20 years old. I used the word tripping to describe a very complicated process, but I was basically tripping for 3 months. And obviously, I don't know, LSD was in my system. I didn't take any after that. But, and I experienced a lot of different things. And among them, very interesting things started to happen. There's a lot of homeless people on the street who were seemingly schizophrenic or were talking to people who weren't there, would start to come up to me and start to talk to me. And they'd start, hey, like, you know what I'm talking about. I see you see what's going on. And I was like, holy shit, like they're not doing this to anyone else. It's not like they're just specifically, it was really crazy. And I also was able to hear distinct voices in my head that were clearly not me. And luckily, and for the grace of God, whatever it is, I knew that it wasn't me, Noah, thinking these things. They were coming from outside places. Which is, you say that to someone, like you say, you can sound like a crazy person, but if you know how to process these things and potentially where they're coming from, could be past lives, you could be tuning. It's like a radio. Your mind, I really believe, is a radio, and if you turn the signal in certain directions, you can pick up stuff that maybe isn't being. I mean, I think our reality, and I think quantum physics backs this up, is an embedded reality. When people talk about 11 dimensions in quantum realists, they're all like folded on top of each other. It's not like they're stacked in like a neat little way. So I bring this up because when you talk about this reality being an educational place, this is something that I've heard Ram Dass talk about it. He talks about, the difficulties in this life is the sandpaper that kind of like smooths out our being so we can then progress. I believe in a lot of interesting things. I'm going up to New York in a week. There's this guy, Tom Kenyon. He's a sound healer who I got tuned into pretty synchronistically a while ago. And he is essentially a channeler and a medium, which is not something I typically provide a huge amount of stock into. I am not willingly, but I've seen him. He is a communication with these beings called Hathors, which are supposedly from the fifth dimension, and they're made of light and sound. And it sounds totally fucking crazy, but I'll tell you, one of the most profound experiences I've ever had was going with my friend, who is not someone I would say is particularly spiritual, not interested in that. We went to one of these things in a big auditorium in the Javits Center in New York, and he like in tone, I mean, he has like a 5.5 octave vocal range. So regardless of whether you believe he's actually channeling something, you're hearing like otherworldly sounds, and he's doing all these chants. And I will never forget, like at the intermission, these things are like 4 hours long, 2 hours. We're walking outside, and I'm a very, very avid marijuana smoker, and I have never in my life felt anything. I felt like I had just smoked like, I don't know, 50,000 joints. I was like floating, and I'm like, we just sat and listened to this guy. And we were just like walking. So it was like ethereal is the only way I can describe it. So I do think your concept of viewing this place as an educational place. And I think ultimately I boil it down to two things. I think we're here for the benefit of our own enlightenment, and that own enlightenment serves the larger goal of benefiting all beings. Right. Everywhere. So I love that you hit on all of those things. It's pretty cool, man. In this second book I wrote, Lucid Dreaming Plain and Simple, which I wrote with my co-author, Carolyn McCready. Yeah. In the final chapter, I put a thought experiment that I hope people will do in order to show them that even waking reality is a mental construct. Yeah. And so I'll just tell people what it is, if you don't mind. So it's very simple. So here's all you have to do. Sit down and think of a characteristic that you have that you're totally neutral about. You're not good at it. You're not bad at it. You don't really like it. You don't really hate it. It's just a neutral characteristic. Like let's say Joe realizes that comedically he's neutral. He's not a great comedian. He's not a horrible comedian. He's just right there in the middle. He doesn't think about it very much because it's just not his thing. So then I tell Joe, I say, look, Joe, 5 times a day for just a minute or two, tell yourself that you're the best comedian in your state, that you're the funniest person in your town, and see people laughing at you, laughing with you. You say something funny, and just imagine that for a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, about 5 or 10 times a day. Do this day after day as kind of a meditation practice. Yeah, I'm the funniest man in town. Yeah, people love me. Yeah, I'm laughing. People are laughing with me. This is great. I'll tell you, within 3 days, you'll find yourself in a checkout line at Target, and you'll say something, and everyone will burst out in hysterical laughter. And you'll be sitting there thinking, that wasn't even funny. Right. Why are they laughing? And it's just like you're saying, people on a deep level, at some quantum level, are picking out this mental energy that you're putting on this neutral construct, that you're a comedian, that you're hilarious.
people are picking it up. If you continue this practice, within 6 or 7 days, people will laugh hysterically. You won't even say things, and people will start to laugh just in your presence. And that's just because you put mental energy into a neutral construct, and then you see the world around you respond. And that's when you'll realize that, oh, Jesus Christ, this entire thing is a bloody mental construct.
Yes.
But you got to do the practice to see it.
Well, I mean, that excellent. I'm totally doing it, but I think if you want proof of that, and you're not going to do it because you're lazy, look at Donald Trump. What do you think Donald Trump has been telling himself for 50 years? I'm the best. This shit is not tacky. It's awesome. I'm a great businessman. I'm really good at this. People love me. I'm going to be president. Oh, like he's gotten pretty far with nothing. So if you don't believe it, it's definitely a thing.
That's funny. I did want to mention something else that is probably 97, 98. I've been reading the books by Jane Roberts called The Seth Material, which is also channeled material.
Cool.
And the thing about it is the ideas stand on their own.
Exactly.
Either the ideas have value or not, whether it comes from Stalin or Hitler or, who knows what, the ideas have value in and of themselves. And whether it's her subconscious mind or whatever, I just don't care. It's the ideas that have value. So anyway, I went to a conference about her. She had passed away by that time. I went to a conference about her and people talking about all their experiences and all. Anyway, at the end of the conference, I'm going out to my rental car and I'm throwing my luggage into the trunk, and all of a sudden, I feel my neck being extended. And then I realize my voice has changed, and all of a sudden, my solar plexus chakra, and I never think of chakras. I mean, chakras are just too wacky.
Yeah.
It begins to spin counterclockwise, and it literally spins counterclockwise for almost 30 days.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, during that 30-day period, I was in this altered state. Occasionally, I'd ask my wife to hold my hands because literally I felt like I was going to begin to float.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's how powerful sometimes. But that's what I like about this idea of just even going to Tom Kenyon's thing, just hearing him out, just listening to the ideas. Sometimes an idea has energy, and sometimes that energy can really transport people.
That's right.
But if you want to play around with it in your own self, just do my little practice.
Definitely.
You're the funniest person in town. Do it 10 times a day. Within 3 days, people will be laughing at totally stupid stuff you say, and you realize that it's being broadcast at some other level, and people are picking it up and responding to it. And so that's when you begin to realize that your experienced reality is a mental construct. There was this famous Buddhist dream yoga master in the Dzogchen tradition, Dawa Gyaltsen, and his heart teaching was basically vision is mind, which basically means experience is mind.
Right.
Mind is emptiness.
Right.
Emptiness is clear light. Clear light is union. Union is great bliss. And so the first thing, though, is you have to realize that experience is mind. Your personal experience, the global experience, is all connected to mind. And then once you let go of mind, then you realize that emptiness lies at the heart of all of this, lies underneath and behind all of this charade, this illusion, this facade. And then when you get to that point, then you begin to have experiences of clear light and can really take it far. But it's a tough, long practice. When my first book came out, Lucid Dreaming Gateway to the Inner Self, within a few months I got an email from a Buddhist abbot. And he told me that he had gone to a dream yoga monastery for 3 years in Asia.
Yeah.
And he said reading my book taught him more about dream yoga than what he had learned in 3 years. And he said when he read my book, he realized what the monks were trying to teach him.
Yes.
But he was just too dense to get. But when he saw me talk about lucid dreaming from kind of a Western perspective going deep, then he goes, crud, I get it.
Well, this is something that Jung talked about a lot, is that we experience other cultures and other societies from our own lens. No matter how much we think we embody that, we're not from there. So when monks are trying to teach, that's why I'm excited about where we are with Buddhism right now in the West, is we're in second, third, sometimes fourth generation teachers who grew up in the West. Like that book I keep referring to, Mind Beyond Death. This guy is talking about like data drives and he's not like full blown neuroscience going into Buddhism, but he's like being able to use analogies that make a lot of sense. And I think that what you're talking about, being able to bring up things that line up. I was having this conversation with my buddy Corey, who has a podcast called The Astral Hustle on MindPod Network, which is the podcast network I run. We were having this conversation and I've lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
So he was able to translate some Buddhist concepts in Western terms that people could understand.
Shit, you know what? It's gone. It'll come back to me right when we're done recording, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, damn. Oh, it was going to be something that completely related to what we were talking about. But oh well, it happens. This goes back to me being an avid marijuana smoker. So, there's a trade-off with everything. Okay, so let's sum up and wrap up. I mean, this conversation has been such a clear evolution of the first one, which was more of kind of the practical experiences, introducing. This is right in the wheelhouse of the stuff I'm interested in. When we're talking about the intersection of dreams and reality, we're talking about being able to use dreams and lucid dreams as a tool to potentially investigate concepts and awareness. And we're talking about potentially the meaning of life, which is, why are we here? What is this all for? Is this just imagination games, or is there some purpose behind it? So if you could leave listeners with one major thought, you're the most important thing you can think of, summing everything up into one thought. It doesn't obviously have to be the most important thing, but something you would really like to communicate that you think is valid. What would that be?
Just getting across this idea that you and your larger awareness create the experienced reality that you experience. And by changing your mind, you can change that experience. So you can do that little experiment I suggested or whatever, but changing your mind will show you that the experience changes. So you and your larger awareness co-create this experience, change your mind, change your experience.
Love it. All right. We'll definitely do a part 3 and hopefully a part 4 and a part 5. I think there's a lot of rich ground to cover, and it's really been fun getting to hear your personal stories and like your perspective on this stuff, because I think it's, you seem to have an incredibly valuable experience to share, which I think is ultimately what we do. So thanks, man.
Thanks, Noah.
All right. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Adios.
Episode with Robert Waggoner. I think I'm going to do that for every episode at the end here. Give a little acapella performance for you guys. Thank you for listening, Robert. Right? I mean, I want to have him on again because, to be clear, in Tibetan Buddhism, people train decades to get this stuff in their heads and how to manipulate dream states. It's like a practice. It's one of the dream yoga is a practice. And Robert can do it with ease. So that's cool whenever you get to talk to someone like that. A lot of synchronicities for me personally throughout this episode, and just dreams and stuff I'm interested in, people I've been talking to. So I always appreciate that. Thank you to everyone who has donated to the podcast. I really, really, really appreciate it. Everybody's life has oscillations of abundance and not abundance, we'll call it. And so for the people who have contributed, offsetting some of the costs of the podcast, I really appreciate it, especially these past few months. So I have some really cool guests coming up next week. I think I'm recording like 4 or 5 podcasts. So I think that's going to be good for everyone. And thank you to everyone who rates and reviews the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and wherever else it is that I don't even know about, Google Play. I really appreciate it. It helps the podcast. We're trying to do some cool things with it's affiliate stuff, but like I don't want to have this show be sponsored by, Chico's. I don't know why I keep using the example of Chico's. I don't even know what fucking Chico's is. I think it's a shop for ladies wear at the mall. I don't know why I'm using it. Chico's probably great. Don't mean to bash Chico's at all. I'm not doing that. But, I want to have these shows brought to you by, if someone's going to sponsor, there's going to be a deal for a show. I want it to reflect the content of the show, which is why I'm happy that we're doing Alan Watts Foundation as a sponsor. So I'm trying to build out an actual system for that. This is a side thing. It's related to MindPod Network. But I'm trying to make this stuff work for everyone in a way that is not only supportive of the listeners, but also the people who help get this content out, having these conversations, because I think there's a win-win-win in this for everyone. So we'll see how that goes. That's a little bonus for listeners of the show. We'll see how that evolves over the next few months and years, talking to some cool people about this. And I think it's going to be cool stuff. So thank you. Rambling on at the end here. That's usually something I do at the beginning, but I'm excited. I like podcasting. It's fun. I will see you next week.